Welcome to the debut episode of the FU Show, episode 2. This episode has been brought to you by Aviation Gin. Smooth. All right, so that's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? The debut show, yet episode 2. So don't bother searching for it. There is no episode 1. You are not losing your mind. Episode 1 technically was a cool, calm, and collected version of a Get in the Ring song by Guns N' Roses, discussing a fair use matter and disagreement we were having with a rights holder. And ultimately, thankfully, we never had to publish episode 1 because cooler heads prevailed. But I liked the title so much that I said I was going to keep it and use it for a later day. So my name is Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. I am the founder and CEO of WatchMojo. And so I guess the first question is, what is the FU show? FU obviously stands for fuck you, but no, I don't plan on swearing too much on this show, but it's not necessarily FU in that sense. Obviously, it was inspired by fair use, so yeah, there's going to be a little bit of that, but I don't necessarily think that this is a show you tune in just to dive into copyright matters. Obviously, we'll cover digital media, we'll cover web video, we'll cover the streaming platform wars. There'll be a little bit of copyright and fair use, but it'll be a lot about management and entrepreneurship and work-life play balance. So it's really just about that. One of my colleagues said, is it basically like deep thoughts from a digital entrepreneur? Yeah, sort of. Another one asked me, is it about the trials and tribulations of running a large YouTube brand or a company on YouTube? Yeah, that sounds all about right. The reality is, 14 years into this racket, my experiences may be unique, but they're actually not that different than yours. And so, as I was kind of looking at how 2019 went down and looking at Context, this brand that we launched under the WatchMojo umbrella, taking stock of what we did well, quite proud of a lot of the accomplishments we had, including a whole documentary that we produced called Fox in the Henhouse. I was kind of planning for 2020, and I realized that, you know, ultimately, we all go through innovator's dilemma and we all go through challenges of doing new things. So last week, for example, we shot a business battleground episode on the Google founders. And basically, it was kind of a timely topic. The Google guys, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, decided to step down. And frankly, we always kind of package these, Rebecca and I'll explain why Rebecca's not here, by the way. We always package these in a very timeless facade. And everybody's working hard. I think my colleague Alex, who is behind there in the control room, he's usually one of the guys who edits these videos. And I'm like, so when is this video going out? And he's like, oh, in a few weeks. And I'm like, okay, all good, no problem, no ego. You know, he's working on the end of year and end of decade series that we have for the Mojoholics, and that takes precedence. And again, I think the reason why WatchMojo works as a business, as an organization, is because we kind of make the right decision for the organization. But that also was a wake-up call for me. And as I'm sure for you guys as well, when you have your own daily jobs, that you are always trying to get people to buy into your vision, to buy into your ideas. And we always face these obstacles, right? I mean, look, I run this joint, so to speak, and it's hard for me sometimes to get shit done. And I can't imagine that you don't feel the same way. So I want to open up and use some of my experiences, talk about YouTube, talk about a bunch of things that happen in a more general way that you could apply them to your daily existence. So ultimately, there's a lot of ways to get shit done in life. It actually makes me think of Michael Bloomberg. So Michael Bloomberg is worth about, $50, $80 billion, an ungodly sum of money. And he decided finally to run for president. And it's interesting because Bloomberg, the company he founded and runs, is known for its terminals as well as this media venture that is housed under this money printing ATM-like terminal business. And so I guess Donald Trump has set the standard now for total conflict of interest out of the White House. So Michael Bloomberg, who means well, I'm sure, basically told his team of reporters that they could not write about him, and they could also not write about his Democratic counterparts, which clearly for a news organization is a bit tricky. Now, he went out this past weekend and he basically said that those who work for him receive a paycheck and should understand that that paycheck comes with some restrictions. Now, I assure you, I know mullahs in Iran that have less restrictive media regulations, right? So the point I'm making is there's always a way to get things done in an organization, whether you're the boss or whether you're an employee. And the reality is it's not a joke that in the 21st century and in the 2020s, the most effective leaders understand that they actually work for their employees. So in this podcast, so when we air this show, the idea is that we'll be able to cover timely, trending topics that I'm generally writing about on LinkedIn, tweeting about, sharing, discussing with my colleagues. It'll just be a lot easier to get these out in a long form. We'll then make these available as a podcast, and then we'll slice and dice them the way we have and make them available on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube. So again, as I said, you go through all this every day. It's just our vantage points are a little bit different. So in a few minutes, though, we're going to talk a little bit about get down in the trenches on YouTube. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened last Thursday when YouTube dropped its rewind video and what transpired for us then to come out with our own. And no, somebody I think on the community tab said, wow, you guys are salty that YouTube did not feature you in their rewind video. That's why you're doing the FU show. I swear to you, as more interesting as that storyline is, that's not really what happened. And I think the takeaways there, again, are not about WatchMojo turning around and producing a rewind video. It's about three things, right? One is, we've talked about job. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the way you should look at your work, but it is about liking and loving what you do and owning what you do. And I'll be honest with you, hopefully nobody's watching this. I had in many ways fallen out of love with my job. And I know my colleagues who I almost want to talk out of tuning into this show, I'm sure that some of my colleagues are going to kind of, lean back and go, I wonder what that means. But there were moments in the last few years where doing the day-to-day WatchMojo, CEO gig was more frustrating than liberating. It was more agonizing than it was stimulating, right? And I knew that I had to make some small adjustments, as I'm sure you all go through the day-to-day of your jobs. And I want to share a little bit about the moments where you recognize that there's an opportunity to bring that excitement back. And then two, I do want to talk a little bit about leadership, the difference between being a good and a bad boss. And finally, I want to share some rather unpopular opinions about YouTube. And then later on, a segment that I probably should have done back in 2006 called Ask Ash. I'm going to basically read some questions that I received from my friends. Hopefully they will remain friends. Share the answers I gave them to all of you. So we're going to shift gears here now and get into the meat of the show. So we are at WatchMojo wrapping up our 14th year of operations, right? Running a digital media company, that's basically akin to running a company for 40 years. And last week, we hit a very important milestone. We basically reached 37 million subscribers across the flagship English language WatchMojo channel and all of the other channels that we own and operate on YouTube, including WatchMojo Espanol, Miss Mojo, Context, Plays, Travels, and all of the other ones. Now, if that were a country, a bit of a coincidence, but we'd be somewhere between country number 38, Canada. We're obviously based in Canada. I don't know if many of you know that. And country number 39, Morocco, which has 35 million people. Comparing apples and oranges, obviously citizens with subscribers. And that's kind of the point, right? Because on YouTube, there's been this discussion about, do subscribers matter? And the reality is yes and no. And the reason why that's interesting to discuss is because YouTube is actually about to call that. They're actually going to go and remove dormant accounts, I guess fraudulent accounts. YouTube historically has been very good, not only YouTube, but their parent Google as an organization, to basically avoid, fraud, clickbait nonsense. I'm kind of curious where WatchMojo will end after they do that. Last time they did that, we fared pretty well. But the bottom line is that people always ask me, they go, are subscribers important or not? And like everything else, the answer is yes and no. One reason why it's not, and admittedly this is very frustrating to the YouTube community, is YouTube does not actually send out every notification of a video you just released to all of your subscriber base. It's really, really frustrating. But I actually understand why YouTube does that. If you are a user, and you've subscribed to, say, 100 channels, and if, let's say, each channel publishes a video every day or even every week, that's a tremendous amount of notifications. It's annoying. I get it. YouTube is replacing television, but it's its own thing, right? So you gotta adjust the playbook accordingly. But the reason why I actually think, and this may be a bit contrarian, why subscribers is arguably the most important metric is because unlike a view, which yes, that drives your revenues, and unlike a watch time, which is the #1 metric in the algorithm, subscribers is the one thing that an audience has voluntarily chosen to do in relationship to your brand and your channel. We have 21 million subscribers on YouTube, and I would say the bulk of that, or not the bulk of that, but a main chunk of that came in the 2014 to 16, 17 era. But these are fundamentally individuals, human beings, we're not North Korea, who have chosen to subscribe to you. And I actually think that YouTube always kind of adjusts and tilts back and forth. I think what you will be seeing effectively is a regression to the mean where the value of a subscriber will go up. So when it comes to why we are doing this show in the context of Context, which is a sub-brand of WatchMojo, the takeaway for you has to be putting yourself in a position to do the things you enjoy. No more excuses. We all have them. I go to bed every night thinking that I can take over the world. And then in the morning, I wake up and it's cold and I realize, man, maybe I should just stay in bed. It's more comfortable. So as I've been looking at ways to get Context to kind of break through to the next level, I realized one of the small issues, there's always a lot of challenges, but one of the small issues we had was this turnaround time between the videos that we shoot that are timely and when they come out. So if you are watching this, there should be these kind of like messages that you could take away and apply to your own daily existence, which is basically, if I'm looking at how to get WatchMojo, the company, from 37 million subscribers to 50 million, to 75 million, to 100 million, it's not about these big, moonshot, amazing statements that are bold. It's a lot about little things that you have to make to change the way you eat, the way you exercise, and the way you interact with your colleagues. The #1 reason why WatchMojo has been able to succeed overall does boil down to our culture, which ultimately is a reflection of your communications. So last week, there were 3 stories that stood out for me, which boiled down to being an effective leader, being a good boss, being a bad boss. I've hesitated using the Bill O'Reilly clip, you've all seen it, the whole "fuck it, we'll do it live," which would have probably been absolutely the single most appropriate video to use to capture us going live with at least the FU show. The reason why I hesitated to do that is not because it's not a hilarious video, but it's because Bill O'Reilly is probably the opposite of how you could be a leader, not just in front of the cameras in a studio, but in an organization, right? You could research Bill O'Reilly, you could research what happened at Fox and many other places, and if you just read between the lines and the staggering sums that he had to pay to settle some of the complaints against him, he's at like the end of the spectrum of ineffective, bad, a-hole bosses. But the takeaway for me was, I was trying for a year to get my team to buy into a system, to do certain things, and it took me to go back to the drawing board and ultimately say that no more excuses, no more getting comfortable and complacent. I need to just totally revisit and go back to the drawing board to get things done in a way that I think will yield the right results. When you think of whiteboards, you think of coaches in organizations. So if you live in Canada or if you follow the NHL, in the last month, you've probably come across the story of Mike Babcock. Mike Babcock is one of the most successful hockey coaches, purely coaches in all of pro sports. And there's been a lot of like sordid stories regarding like the techniques that he's used over the years to get his team and his players to go along with his strategy and his tactics. He was ultimately let go by the Toronto Maple Leafs, despite the fact that he's still on the hook for about $25 million. But the interesting thing for me was not that he was let go because of his being an asshole. He was ultimately let go because the Toronto Maple Leafs were sucking, the results were not there, and then that opened basically a Pandora's box where, being let go, players were comfortable to speak up. Now, business is not sports, but they're very much similar. Last week, we saw 2 other stories of companies where there were stories about, CEOs that were basically not necessarily examples of good bosses. One was at company Away, where Steph Curry, she was basically accused of being a horrible person. And then at Razer, which, full disclosure, is a company that we've always chatting about ways to promote their gaming mice, there was a story in Kotaku about how he was also not the friendliest and nicest of CEOs. You always hear, so I'm not defending their behavior, just to be very clear, but as a CEO, you always hear of horror stories from employees at other companies and how they eventually say enough's enough and they go out and they start to basically air their discontent. And as a CEO, and as a founder, as a leader, whether you're a CEO or not doesn't really matter. You could be a VP, you could be a manager, or somebody that leads other people. You always kind of like go back and you ask yourself, could anybody say that's not the case? And the reality is, I think two reasons why people leave good organizations. It's true. It's not so much that they don't like the company, it's that they don't necessarily love the people that they work for. You've seen that meme for sure on LinkedIn and elsewhere. People don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. I think people leave to start their own company for 2 or 3 reasons. 1, bad bosses. 2, they don't get the opportunities that they feel that they deserve. When I was interviewing Shira Lazar at VidCon, she said that the number 1 reason why she decided to ultimately do her own thing as an entrepreneur was because she wasn't getting the kind of hosting opportunities that she felt she merited. And I've referenced in these videos, especially The Context is King, why I decided eventually to become an entrepreneur. And I always kind of quasi-joke about, what would have happened if I would have pursued a career in sports. When the Mike Babcock story hit, I was sharing our, respective experiences with a lot of other fellow entrepreneurs and just a lot of other fellow, amateur athletes. And we all kind of said the same thing, that none of this is really new to anybody who ever aspired to be an athlete. And frankly, none of this was really new to anybody that has strived to lead an organization. The problem was that the same way that the Me Too movement change what was acceptable and what a lot of people would tolerate in certain organizations, I think you're starting to see this changing of the guard, this new philosophy, this new thinking that effectively employees just will not accept putting up with a lot of the bullshit that they've historically had to accept to earn a paycheck, going back to Mike Bloomberg's reference. And I think my experience and my takeaway of running WatchMojo, which ultimately still remains a pretty small organization, is not ever wanting, at least hoping to, not ever wanting to start acting like some of these dicks and assholes that you hear about, that you wonder, hey, they're getting the funding, they're doing the tough things that are required to break through and to hit the higher revenue figures and to go get the higher valuations, but at what cost? And over the last 2-3 years, you saw Travis Kalanick at Uber get replaced with Dara, formerly from Expedia, and now you see that ultimately it's like half of a dozen, 6 of another. You're basically replacing one CEO who grinds people with another one, still leading to ineffective results. So I think the same way that you have to kind of break the cycle and be able to not give in to evil, not give in to that temptation of essentially grinding through your team, is the challenge that you have when you are basically an employee who basically cannot get through and get their ideas implemented and embraced. So I want to talk a little bit about the stress and anxiety and frustration that we have. But before we do, I'd like to call up Exhibit A, which will take you a little bit back to Thursday afternoon.
meant the YouTube Rewind, right?
Yes.
I finally have to just confront and accept this. I'm gay.
Oh my god, ew! 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 Oh my god! Oh my god, it's so ugly!
Is really going to be breathtaking. You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking.
What
What I will say about trying to apply giant lipstick is that it's not really the right shape for anyone's mouth.
All right, Gordon Ramsay, here we are. Episode 8, Season 8, Episode 1.
Because he won't have much gas. Was that a knockdown? Oh, no. Said Jack Reese. It was behind the head.
You are using your fame, your power, your money to play with people's emotion.
The fact that Tati brought this up blows my mind because she knows the real story.
What is this? T-Series saying cease and desist. Had a problem with me telling them to hold their defecation, but let me educate you, silly, that's not defamation.
Not only can we sue Google and YouTube for compliance with COPPA, but also individual channel owners.
Now we need mulch. Put the mulch around the tree, and we hydrate it, and there we go.
Let me count you down, okay? Five.
So very few videos make me cry, and I guess I'm a bit of a softie because when I saw that video that we produced, if you get to number 1, you may, like me, been a bit verklempt, been a bit emotional. So fitting maybe to talk about being emotional and whatnot as an entrepreneur, because doing the rewind video, or I guess the circumstances around it, was honestly the moment that this year I fell back in love with my job. Now, I am beyond blessed. There are probably more kids growing up right now saying that they want to become YouTubers. I purposely, by design, did not want to become a YouTuber. I'm very reluctant to be here in front of the camera now and doing this. But ultimately, managing a media company and being able to go direct to consumers and viewers, which is what the Disneys of the world are doing, blowing up their businesses, is something that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. It's an awesome privilege. I sincerely thank you, the viewers, the team, and whatnot. But I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't grown a bit frustrated, because as we grew, I recognized that the reason why we were successful and able to get so much done was because of all the systems and the processes in place. And to an entrepreneur that's basically a wild tiger out there, that's frustrating as hell. So last week, we figured that YouTube would put out its rewind and, like every other year, alienate half the community, or more than half. And so sometime in the afternoon, I noticed on Twitter that people were basically kept referencing WatchMojo. And it was in conjunction with the rewind video. And I didn't really get it until one of the folks that I follow just basically said that, this year, YouTube Rewind was just essentially a WatchMojo video. It was a top 10 list. And so, of course, you had those that would kind of say, oh, WatchMojo, it's, they shit on us, and that's all part of the territory. And unless somebody more experienced and wiser than me has said, is the day when nobody criticizes you anymore is the day when you should be concerned. But it kind of hit me, and I said, you know what? I told my team, I go, it's kind of flattering and cool that everybody on YouTube's channel watching this video, or not everybody, but a lot of them, were basically immediately associating the top 10 format with WatchMojo. And as much as I say we did not invent, the format, Letterman, Wayne's World, Moses, the OG of lists, I go, it's kind of cool that we did kind of reinvent it and run with it and make it our own. And so my reaction initially was just to fire off an email to my team and saying, look, why don't we just do a top 10 rewind videos where we just list down our favorites. And admittedly, that's like a very typical WatchMojo video to do, and we kind of like left it at that. But as I was kind of going through it myself and watching more and more of the feedback that came up, you know, noticing, for example, that like etiquette wasn't mentioned and a lot of other things that seemed like omissions. And again, YouTube was just going with pure stats to, admittedly, I'm guessing, play it safe. I kind of got up and I said, you know what, the hell with it. To the same way that I just said, screw it, we're going to do this live, we're going to throw the playbook out and just reinvent things, I was like, we should do a top 10 video, no need for voiceover, that basically runs down some omissions and going back to our roots, not just inform and entertain, but to serve the audience, give the community what they wanted. And so we discussed it and we decided to just go for it. And even though it took us hours before we decided to do anything, I was so proud, I was so ecstatic. I felt like a little kid again that we basically just decided to do a video and did it. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, when we come to work on a Monday morning and a new trailer is dropped, yes, the WatchMojo machine is built to do that. But as an entrepreneur, my reality is more and more having my ideas now kind of like shut down, shuttered, put in a box, put in a process. And I don't mind that. That's the way successful organizations evolve to. But I kind of realized that like I'm basically, like most other entrepreneurs, a jack of all trades, master of none. I'm a generalist who's surrounded himself with these awesome specialists who are really, really good at different aspects of the business. And by the way, there's a book called Range: Why Generalists Prevail in a Specialized World by David Epstein that I'm planning on reading, which I'm guessing talks about this. And I kind of realized that, you know, this was something that we wanted to do. Now, I hesitated for a second thinking, oh, again, there's going to be like the vocal minority that's going to say, oh, you guys are, you know, capitalizing on this. And because we were going to run Desmond Daniel Amofa, aka Etika, at number 1, who took his own life this year, then for a split second, I was struggling with, you know, I won't lie, the issue of unmonetizing the video. Years ago, we covered, we did a biography posthumously on the Nintendo founder, and of course on YouTube, people always complain, it's all good. People were basically, you know, wondering why we were doing that. But long story short, I just said, like, within a second, it was like everything, the stars aligned. As an entrepreneur, it was like, why I'm an entrepreneur. I was like, I got it. We're gonna leave the clip monetized, but we'll donate all the proceeds to a cause that helps address mental health well-being and depression and preventing suicide. And if you watch any of the videos on Context, Rebecca and I had discussed how we wanted to start WatchMojo.org to basically fund causes. Now, my wife and I, Christine, who started the company, we do donate privately, personally, sometimes behind the scenes, but I won't lie, I was always looking at other YouTubers who were doing this, and I always struggle to find an opening to get in a more active, you know, in front of the camera way, so to speak. And this was a perfect opportunity, and I think it kind of just like wrapped everything around. And you know, the documentary I produced this year was kind of like sat on social commentary on capitalism and socialism, and I somehow, managed to offend the capitalist who thought I was a socialist and managed to offend the socialist that thought I was a capitalist, which to me is mission accomplished. But the next documentary that I'm going to be touching on, working title is Selling Out: The Paradox of Entrepreneurship. You know, again, I'm kind of figuring out like the right angle, and I've decided to actually talk a lot about mental health and, you know, well-being. And in my third book, I mention how depression is the flip side of the coin of addiction and whatnot. And that was my reference to aviation gin, which we're going to get to in a second. Earlier this year, I had an acquaintance that I wasn't necessarily super friends with, but through Facebook, you kind of follow each other and you kind of see, oh, this person has, you know, family, young kids and whatnot. And there was a gentleman in the Montreal community, an entrepreneur who took his own life. And my wife kind of has always told me to kind of like not reference people, whether this gentleman or Kate Spade or Linkin Park singer Chester Bennington or Chris Cornell. and so many others, Anthony Bourdain. And as much as I want to tread carefully, because obviously I'm not, I don't want to talk about these individuals. I don't know who they are. You don't know what people go through. I kind of feel like these people have given so much creatively, entrepreneurially to create jobs and bring happiness to people. And it's kind of a tragedy, not just for them, but also their family and loved ones, where it's hard when you are driven. It's hard where you are seen as successful to open up and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm not happy, despite the fact that your bank account is, huge, or you have like awards and you win, love you. It is hard to sometimes say life's not easy because things are relative, right? So this weekend, and both the Rewind Fixed and the FU show are part of that, I love my job, but I do feel like we all want to do more. And, I've always said that entrepreneurship is ultimately about a series of insecurities. And there are good insecurities and bad insecurities. I think a good insecurity is wanting to leave your mark and legacy and help. And it's not just about serving fans with top 10 lists, as much as I love that from an entertainment perspective. I really feel that, as somebody who's very driven, who obviously, I don't like being live in front of a camera. There's masochism, and this is a whole other level of masochism. But I do feel like that is actually something that I'm well-versed to help. One of the reasons why I feel I've had success is the communication part of it. And I do think that a lot of times when you hear somebody take their own life, it's like there's this block where they just can't communicate. They keep it inside. So, connecting the dots somehow to this is not, by the way, gin. I would like to point the record to show that. So this last week, unless you're living in a rock, there was basically an ad for Peloton, as we would say in Montreal. And we don't speak with a French, Français, Parisien accent, but anyway, that's not the point. So Peloton is like a stationary bike with basically an iPad on it, if I get it right. And unless you're living in a rock, Monica Ruiz is an actress who stars in it as, this sweet wife who gets a gift from her husband, and she's like 115, and by the end of the year she goes to 112 pounds. And I agree. There's definitely overtures of sexism and many other things. People obviously on Twitter go crazy. The guy comes out, the actor, going, I don't know if I'll ever have a career again. Monica Ruiz is like, I'll own it. So our paisano Ryan Reynolds, who in 2018, I think, invested in a stake. Everybody's an entrepreneur these days. So Ryan Reynolds, I guess, seeing George Clooney have Casamigos, which, by the way, is a fine tequila, decides to invest in aviation gin, which I've never had, but I guess it's smooth, right? So Ryan Reynolds tracks down Monica Ruiz, and I don't know if you guys want to play Exhibit C, please, which is the aviation gin, and we should have prepped this a bit more. I don't know if you were playing it? I'll talk. So, okay, I got it. See, this is practice. Okay, so the idea is that she's playing herself, the actress, and this is like with her two girlfriends. They're out, girls' night out. And she's like, I guess, just letting it all sink in that everybody kind of is criticizing her and everybody hates her. And so she goes, oh, this gin is smooth, and downs a martini. Now, I love martinis as much as the next guy or gal or Monica, but it's kind of insane because my first she's owning it, and it's great. And Ryan Reynolds is a genius. And I'm not easily offended. And to be clear, I'm not offended at all. Like, I find it entertaining. It's actually a great ad. This is more a commentary about society. We live in an era where we've kind of decided tobacco smoking, it's bad. We forgot about that, and now vaping was like, here, every kid gets born, you take off the diapers, you're given a vape. Fine. We're realizing that that's probably also not the wisest of ideas. But we at least were living in this hypocritical state where we're like, okay, alcohol is sort of okay. We're going to take the ad dollars from alcohol, but you know what? Let's drink moderately. That's kind of been like how we pretend to be less hypocritical. But this ad basically is like drink your sorrow away. It's binge drink. It's down a martini, not even down a beer or down a bottle of champagne because you won the F1 final somewhere. It's basically down gin, martini, straight. So I don't have an issue per se, but I guess, the point I want to get to is if you're going to be having an honest conversation about mental health, depression, suicide, addiction is part of that conversation, right? So we were kind of shitting on Peloton but praising Aviation Gin, which I think was probably, to be candid, the more harmful, far and away, of the two messages. I don't think. In any case, so to close off before we get to the Ask Ash portion of the show, this is not going to be a popular, talking about whiners, people whining about Peloton, myself seemingly complaining about the Aviation Gin. A lot of people were complaining about YouTube. And they're not just Rewind, everything about YouTube. So after we did our Rewind Fixed video, I actually sent Susan Wojcicki, CEO of YouTube, an email, short and sweet. Yes, I tend to do that sometimes. And I just basically had subject line, this is how you do it, and in the body of the email, just a link to our video, and I sent it to them. But then the next day when I woke up, I did want to clarify, and I basically told them, I said, look, I think we, WatchMojo, producing and publishing our videos on all these platforms, we have a panoramic view, and I think you guys, being so big, are always vilified and criticized. I think you guys are considerably a net positive. You heard Scott Galloway come out this weekend and trash Twitter and Jack Dorsey and basically say, you should resign, you suck, your stock has underperformed. But Twitter is a net positive, unlike Mark Zuckerberg, who's basically the devil. I think YouTube is a fantastic net positive. I think they're just so big that they'll never, be able to make even 51% of the people happy. So, but I think it's just a reflection of where things are. So on that note, we're almost done this first episode, maybe the last episode. And I don't know how often we're going to do this. Maybe weekly, maybe bi-weekly, we'll figure it out. But I have in this envelope, Ask Ash. So I get a lot of emails from friends, industry people asking me for advice. And I wasn't sure, obviously I wasn't planning on doing this. But being a writer, a columnist, I used to write for TechCrunch, so oftentimes TechCrunch will, TechCrunch Media Post, all these Verge, all these publications. I referred to earlier Steph Corey. She was the CEO of Away, so she basically got trashed in a couple of articles. Kotaku wrote about Min Liang Tan of Razer. These are not celebrities in the traditional sense. So sometimes when there are written negative pieces about them, years later, they ask things like, quote, Ash, as my little guy gets more access to the internet, I'm wondering how I could wash away some of the terrible things that have been written about me, end quote. Now, this is not like a rapist, a murderer. This is not even somebody that, it's not a bad person. It's literally somebody, like I've alluded to before, an entrepreneur, many of whom I know, many of whom mean well, but who, unlike me, when people shit on them and I'm very lucky. Generally, when people write articles about me, it's positive, but everybody will have something eventually more critical about them, and you have to kind of be able to take that. But so I kind of told them, and I think this applies to you again, because if you read between the lines, it's not just about articles about you on Verge. So I said, look, regarding the terrible things, I said, my honest advice as a web entrepreneur, as a writer, columnist, as a father, and as someone who's occasionally written about, I don't think it's possible to accomplish what he wants to do, which is make these articles go away. I think if you email Verge and go, ooh, you wrote about me a year ago and it wasn't great, could you take it down? Yeah, that's not going to happen. They're not going to take it down. So I actually said, look, I think your son is old enough to sit down and for you to talk to him about 4 things. One, I said your heritage. I said, you come from and by the way, it's not evident who I'm talking about, but if you read my 3rd book, you'll probably figure out who I'm talking about. And no, that's not a plug for the book. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to keep this a secret, but it's not really important. So, but one I said is your heritage. I said you, your dad, your family, you come from a pretty high profile, well-to-do family. I said, and that comes with a higher degree of responsibility. You don't choose the family that you are born in, but clearly if you are born on 3rd base, yeah, that comes with a higher degree of responsibility. 2, I said your privilege. Sometimes you could be born in a high-profile, celebrity-like family, but you don't necessarily have money. But I said in your situation, your wealth is like a superpower. You could use it for good or for bad. But like a superpower, it could boomerang and come back and bite you in the butt. 3, I said your experiences. I said to your son, you should just explain that the experiences that you have, like the way you reacted in the past to people writing negative things about you, are what make you who you are. And to your son, you should explain that in life you don't get a mulligan. So you have to treat every one of these experiences like a puzzle that then paint a picture of who you are. And then 4, I said the lesson. What is the lesson you learned? You want your son to make mistakes and fall and hurt himself and get back up, but you ultimately want him to learn a lesson. And I said, here's the way I would frame it. I think life, in life, the truth has 3 sides. His, hers, and the truth in the middle. Not always, but generally speaking. So what I told him to say to his son is, the same way that you as a father are not the way you are portrayed in those articles, you want your son to remember that when he grows up reading about other people, to give those other people an opportunity to actually make their own case. And you as an individual should judge them for the way that they are with you and not based on hearsay. And I thought he would tell me, email me back saying, your philosophical mumbo jumbo sucks. That's not what I wanted to hear. But he actually replied with a short and sweet but very gracious note. So I thought, since I used to earn a living giving out advice, believe it or not, we would do that. So that's the show. I mean, I don't really know what I was expecting out of it, but if you have questions you'd like me to give you very non-privately and read them out afterwards, somewhat anonymized, let me know. But ultimately, that's it. So over the next month, I'm going to be planning the Context 2020 and 2020's strategy. I may carve out Context as a whole other brand, not just brand, a whole other company. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if it makes sense for Context to be under WatchMojo. I love WatchMojo, but there are pros and cons to that. I also, gonna throw out a little thing here. I also was reading up on the Green Bay Packers this weekend. Now, the Green Bay Packers are a community-owned nonprofit. I think it's good to be for-profit because then you don't have to go up to people and ask for money, and it's good to be profitable, and it's good to be healthy. But I'm actually thinking of this, what does a media company that is owned by its viewers, by its fan base, look like? So I'm not saying I'm going to do that with Context, but it's something I'm looking at. I'm speaking to lawyers. I'm speaking to people more experienced and smarter than me. And that's kind of where I want to take Context. I kind of want it to be, to wrap up, in 2018, myself and 2 other folks that were with the company at the time, we went down to New York, we did 3 interviews, we published 2 of them with Anthony Scaramucci and Complex's Rich Antonielli, and the 3rd one was Rafat Ali of Skift that we published this year, and that was it. And I kind of forgot about it. I wasn't sure if, I'll be honest, as an entrepreneur that I attribute a lot, obviously, vision, execution, persistence, ambition, but luck and timing, and then focus once you know what to focus on. I wasn't sure if I had it in me to start again, especially while I was still running WatchMojo. But I do feel that there is something here for me now that WatchMojo is in good hands, run by all these awesome, fantastic people. And I wasn't sure if I had it in me, but this year we produced a shit ton of content, and we did a documentary, and we did hundreds of videos and little, analytical type reports, business battlegrounds, and we did the Content ID, investigative journalism stuff. And I look back at it and I go, that's pretty impressive. And it was I'll be very humble here, maybe half of Alex's time, and who's working on a lot of other stuff, and a few others at the company. But I'm like, if I were to give Context a shot and kind of seed it with a little bit of capital, and all these people that are coming out of the woodwork saying they like what we're doing here, they want to get active, and we actually cover a topic and get it out that day instead of 3 weeks later, that's not shade, Alex, then maybe this can go someplace good. That's it. That's the show. I hope you had some feedback. I'm sure you didn't because this is YouTube. WatchMojo buys the Green Bay Packers. Not sure we're doing that, Ty. Not sure if that's a takeaway. Oh yeah, Rebecca. So Rebecca basically is around. I guess now that she's doing these junkets, she's too good for me. No, I'm kidding. So Rebecca told me way back that she was not comfortable doing live. I don't blame her. Live is tough. I used to do live radio. It scared me as hell. I had to drink a whole bottle of gin before coming on to do this. But, Rebecca's around. She's not going anywhere. She's busy at junkets and hanging out with The Rock. Excusez-moi, pardonnez-moi. But she's going to be around. But that's also the thing. If you see this and you're like, Ash is kind of like crazy madman, but I would like to be part of this live show. And, you're like, this is my calling. I'm not very hard to find. But yeah, your number one challenge is to track me down. If I give you my email, it's a bit too easy. That's it. that's all. There's probably a few other things I wanted to cover, but I think you've had enough of me for today. Thank you very much. Cheers.